I'm Lucia Perugini. I'm just a quick introduction about myself to get us to know it. I'm working from the at the CMCC, as Danilo was saying. Particularly, I'm dealing with climate change and forest and agriculture, supporting the Minister of Environment in the negotiation at the UNFCCC since many years, 2003, I think, the first COP. So I've been fully involved in the climate change process at the international level, but also at the national level, involved in the adaptation strategy and plan, and also following some research projects about the interface between policy and science. So I will go to my presentation. Let's see if I share. Am I sharing? No. Danilo, can you confirm or
no? We no.
Not yet.
No, not yet.
No, not yet.
Let's try again.
Try again.
Yeah. Okay. Now it's
fine.
Okay.
Great. Trying to put in the okay. That's I have a square I need to get rid of. Okay. So, and of course, given my background, the focus of the general climate change policy and governance will focus on the land sector. Now I have to get how to, okay, sorry. No. Oh, it works. Okay. Thank you. No, just to get familiar with this too. So this year, I mean, last 2 years have been very prolific in the, let's say, in the scientific production of the main bodies, the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which serve the Convention on Climate Change, providing the synthesis of the most updated and research on different aspects. Usually they provide the assessment report on the climate, covering the physics, mitigation aspects and adaptation aspects in the assessment report, which is every 7 years. But the last 2 years, they have been mandated to provide some specific report. The first one was on the global warming of 1.5 degrees, published in 2018. Then they produced the climate change and land, so exploring all the impacts and the mitigation potential of land in 2019, actually. This is wrong, it's 19. And then the last one is also the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. Which is the most recently published. And then also in the other side of the Intergovernmental Panel of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, that is serving actually the CBD, the Convention on Biodiversity, also produce a very important assessment report on biodiversity ecosystem services. In general, all the report actually reported an unprecedented overexploitation of natural resources in human history. We need to consider that 70% of the global ice-free land surface is affected by human use. Cropland covers 40%, and since 1961, there was an increase of per capita consumption of vegetable oils and meat by 2. I mean, it's twofold. The increase, the use of inorganic nitrogen fertilizers has actually increased 9-fold, and the water for irrigation by 2 times. And then human use at varying intensity affected about 85% of forest and 70 up to 90 of other natural ecosystems like savanna, natural grassland. And the land use caused global biodiversity to decrease by around 11 and 40%. And let's say that this doesn't seems to stop in the near future. Given that the projection of the world population is actually foreseen to increase up to 9 billion, close to 10 billion in 2050. So what are the risks that have been detected by this report? I'm here reporting these graphs provided by the IPCC special report on climate change and land. There are several risks here identified: dry land, water scarcity, soil erosion, vegetation loss, wildfire damage, permafrost, tropical crop yield decline, and food supply instabilities. The more purple becomes the graph, means that there is a very high probability of severe impacts risks, persistence of climate hazard, and limited ability to adapt. So it's a reversible change attributable to land use change, while yellow can have impacts and risks that are detectable and are attributable to climate change, but somehow also reversible. In the left side, you see the different degrees that are meaning the increase of temperature above the pre-industrial levels. We have already increased the world temperature due to climate change of 1 degree. 1.5 degrees has been detected as the level that has a minor impacts, while 2 degrees, which is actually the objective, so to contain the increase of world temperature by 2 degrees is the objective of the Paris Agreement, still has encounters some more purple, let's say, risks. So it means, especially on food supply instability. So we see that even if we contain the increase of temperature, we still have to tackle the climate change effects in a broader sense in many aspects. However, we are well below with the current, with the current pledges, and we will go through this later in the presentation. The mountain aspects, I mean, there is one report, which is, of course, the one related. Sorry, I have to move this. I have a little square. I don't know if you see it. Probably it's only me. That it's in the middle with the, okay. Okay, the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. One report of the IPCC focus on, especially on high mountain regions, of course, especially for the cryosphere aspects. And again, they report the current effects of climate change, highlighting that glaciers, snow, and permafrost are declining, and they have altered the frequency, the magnitude, and location of most related natural hazards. And then those risks are actually expected to increase, changing water quality and water quantity, affecting therefore household, agriculture, energy systems, and people both in the region and beyond, of course. And then this has also impacts on the environmental, on the environment, with a lower elevation, vegetation, and wildlife changing, the abundance, extent, and upslope. And then changes in cryosphere also alter the land and freshwater habitats of mountain vegetation and wildlife, and also, of course, impacting the economy of these regions, especially the tourism, highlighting specifically also the Hindu Kush, Himalayan, and tropical Andes. So, doesn't move. I will manage at the end of this. Okay. So what are, I have a question, Danilo, if you can, or any of you, can you see my mouse, the pointer of the mouse? Or should I use this?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so climate change, we all are well aware that what is causing, I mean, is the climate change, are greenhouse gases that thank God that they exist, because otherwise our Earth wouldn't be suitable for the human being or any life, because we would have an average temperature of -18. So good that we have, they make this Earth nice and warm. However, the increase that we have seen has not any precedent in the history, even not human history, in the Earth history, at least in the last 800 billions of years. We reached levels that are well beyond, and indeed also it's a very quick increase, so it's altering the equilibrium of the atmosphere and also creating these impacts. Then where are they from? I mean, indeed, the main source of I think there is one microphone which is on. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So the main source, of course, is the energy sector, with the use of fossil fuel that has increased the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. But also agriculture and forest and other energy uses are up to 24% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a very big percentage, actually. And it's given mainly from the, then we will go into details in that as well, of use of fertilizer and methane from enteric fermentation, but as well as, and half of it is actually due to deforestation and land uses and management. Then industry 21%, and then 14% transport, and 6.4% it's due to building sector. And this trend are actually increasing over time. We have here the trends in the different sectors and how they contribute, and actually the trend doesn't look, I mean, there is a little bit slope, but still it's an increasing trend. It's nearly 0.6 per year, I think, in the last years. So it doesn't slow down. So we have, this is the main figure of the carbon cycle, the CO2 emissions in 2009-2018. This is coming from the Global Carbon Project, which is a very interesting, for those that doesn't know, I suggest you to go there and explore the site, which is very nice. They give you a view, all the statistics. Many of my slides are taken from the sites. They focus mainly on CO2, which is the main greenhouse gas, but also now they are implementing also methane and N2O. So where the main source of CO2, as we said, is fossil fuel use, which accounts for 86% of anthropogenic CO2 emissions, but also the land use change, which accounts for 14% of the anthropogenic emissions. And then where are they going, those emissions? Partly they go, they stay in the atmosphere for the 40%, and in the case of CO2, actually they stay in the atmosphere for 100 years. While one part is actually absorbed, removed by the vegetation through the photosynthesis, and another part, the 23%, by the ocean. while the ocean absorption is quite constant over time, the ecosystems, the vegetation ecosystem, actually can vary the capacity to absorb, and they prove to increase actually their absorption process, the removal process with increasing concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, although this can go towards a saturation point where if you increase the CO2 in the atmosphere, the plants action, the vegetation doesn't increase accordingly their capacity to remove it from the atmosphere. So we have, I mean, a pretty good, let's say, awareness of the causes of climate change, their effect. We are more and more experiencing in our daily life. We are every year recording the hottest days ever since they started with the measurements of the temperature. So in the latest 180, the previous century. So we are recording in the last 2 years, 3 years, every year we listen to the news and they say this is the hottest period ever. And the last 3 were always recorded as the hottest years ever. So we had this knowledge that come actually from 1919, even earlier, that scientists are warning about the effect. So what is going? I mean, how the policy environment is reacting to that. So actually, even before, because the first World Climate Conference was held in 1979, and then when it actually lies the foundation of the IPCC, and then the first assessment report of the IPCC was from 1990, and then which actually create the basis for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that was signed in 1992 in Rio, and then but from the onset, it was clear that this wouldn't be enough. So they started immediately to work on the parties of the convention around a protocol or something that could have a target of reduction. And then, so they started the negotiation in 1997. The Kyoto Protocol was signed, and it took a lot of time to enter into force because there was a target within that 55 countries, the nations should sign to make it to force, and but this took time, and it was thanks to because then the US withdrew, and then Russia entered into the picture. And then again, we'll see why the Kyoto Protocol was clear not to be clearly effective in a changing world and global, let's say, political and economical framework. And then they started immediately a new negotiation from Bali that led to the Paris Agreement in 2015. So the Kyoto Protocol, why didn't work actually? The Kyoto Protocol was based on, let's say, the historical responsibility of the climate change that, of course, comes from developed countries. So indeed, the developing countries were claiming the rights of development. So who had to reduce the emissions were those that caused the climate change and alteration, and so developed countries had to take binding targets, and they had to reduce their emission while providing funds and means of implementation for developing countries for a sustainable development. And developing countries could actually access the Clean Development Mechanism. There were projects for reducing emissions that were financed by developed countries. And they could use actually developed countries, Annex 1 parties, as said in the jargon of the convention, could use those emission reduction to achieve their targets. So with a principle that says it doesn't matter where you reduce your emission, important that the budget in the atmosphere decline. However, this was not, I mean, although in principle it's makes sense, but actually, as we said, the economical, let's say, configuration at the international level was changing rapidly. Let's go to see what are the 6 top emitters in 2019. Again, the same source I was saying before, the global carbon budget, that covered the 67% of global emission are just few countries. It's China, 28% of global emission, United States, 15%, EU, 9%, India, 7%, Russia, 5%, and Japan, 3%. So those few countries, so those 6 countries are covering actually more than half of the global emission of CO2. So, and we see that a very quick increase of China's emissions, and also India slowly increasing. So it was clear that we need to have a global effort to achieve the emission reductions at global level. Everybody needs to contribute somehow to this target. Also, if we go to the per capita emissions that reflects the national circumstances more carefully, we see that US has a very high per capita emission. Also, Russia has also an increasing, slightly increasing. Japan and China in early 2010, I think 11 was actually crossed the EU in terms of per capita emissions. And also India is slowly increasing. So even if we look at the per capita, there is not still this huge difference between formerly developed and developing world. And if we attribute, because one comment was always related to the distribution of the production, let's say, we are accounting here for the emissions that are occurring on the territories of these countries. But actually, we should also consider that what we consume in some countries are actually coming from others. So the embedded emissions that are linked to some consumables that we use in our everyday life, like mobiles and trousers and anything that we use mainly comes from China. So many emissions that are emitted there are actually linked to other countries' consumption. So if we take that into account, we can see that indeed the relative share of emissions changes, but in general the proportion it stays. Let's say the absolute share changes, but the relative distribution it doesn't change so much. I mean, if the solid line express the territorial, so the emissions linked to what is emitted on the ground in this country, while the dashed line express the emissions linked to the consumption that is done in that country. So we see that mainly this part of decrease is given by the exportation of the products, while this increase that it's linked to the products that have been imported and the related embedded emissions. So, given this this general, new framework, I would say, new status of the world in the world, it's that this was the basis of the new negotiation of the Paris Agreement. Trying to, developed countries started to say, okay, but we need to do everything, because even if we make all our effort to reduce our emissions, it wouldn't be enough. So we need to contribute all, as far as we can, to this common objective. We still have to take into consideration that it's important to notice that the G20 countries are responsible of around 80% of emissions. Sorry, I forgot to put the emissions, and 85%, and they produced 85% of the GDP. So, still there is where we have the most of the potential of reductions of emissions, and also the strength and economic strength to do so. But anyhow, all the discussions within the UNFCCC, the United Framework Convention, is to the basic principle is a common but differentiated responsibility, respective capability in the light of different national circumstances. So let's see how this was translated. At the end of the story in 2015, actually there was a successful result of the negotiation, although, as you know, after in 2017, I think, US decided to withdraw from the agreement. Anyhow, to this date, 189 parties have ratified the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement entered into force in November 2016. And it was a very successful process, indeed not the best one. The results could have been better, but it was very good that all the world actually convened to an agreement to reduce their emissions and to achieve a common goal. Let's see what are the Paris Agreement objectives. There are three main goals. There is a mitigation goal, which is the long-term objective to hold the increase in temperature below 2 degrees. But actually, there is also an aspirational goal to achieve the 1.5 degrees, which is actually, as we said before, in this, if you remember, in this graph that I've shown you, the difference between 2 degrees and 1.5 are quite important, especially for some risks. So it's important actually that we achieve this 1.5, but it has actually very important effects on the economy, and it needs the 1.5, a really drastic inversion of our economical structure. Then it has also a long-term ambition actually to achieve the carbon neutrality in the second half of the century, which means that emissions, anthropogenic emissions, are completely balanced by the anthropogenic removals. So, and I would like to underline anthropogenic removals. So we are not relying on the absorption, removal process of the forests as they are, but on activities that actually increase management, land use change towards forest afforestation. So any change in the vegetation that increases the removal that are driven by human activities count against this balance, and they actually absorb all the residual emissions. So 0 emissions from fossil fuel in the second half of the century. So what we are aiming to actually is to go towards this kind of scenario, emission scenarios. But actually, where we are, we are not really on track. The second main goal of the Paris Agreement is the adaptation that aims to increase the adapting capacity to climate change. And then, of course, to make it for the equity reasons and also for helping developing countries, there is a third goal that it's ensuring funds in line with the pathway towards a low carbon and resilient development. And why, as we said, the 2 degrees is considered the level that allow the adaptation to a cost that it's that it's actually reasonable. We can afford the costs of adaptation at social, economic, and environmental level. So that's fundamental. We will need to adapt anyway. The effects are there. So adaptation is anyhow something that we need to do. But if we keep the increase of temperature, we limit at well below 2 degrees, then we can afford these costs. The strength of the Paris Agreement and its foundation is actually, and what actually allowed to all countries to actively participate to that is actually that it's a bottom-up agreement. So every single country can define their national determined contribution with a long-term ambition, and they submit this contribution to the Secretariat, to the Paris Agreement. And this is actually there is not any imposed, let's say, target. The target is global. Is a temperature target, but each country can contribute on the basis of how they can achieve and what they can do actually. And also how they express their target, it's very different from country to country. Sorry, it doesn't work. Okay, so how can be ensured this? What are the main pillars of to guarantee the full participation of all parties with ambitious targets? So there are conditions that need to be set to allow all countries with their, as we say, the respective capabilities and national circumstances, not undermining the right of development, because this is key for countries, but anyhow to stimulate a low carbon development for the survival of the human. I wouldn't say of the Earth, because the Earth will survive anyway, it will find, but probably it's our survival which is at stake. So it's indeed the most important pillar is providing finance for developing countries and to also within developed countries to provide finance to stimulate the technology development of clean technology development, but also capacity building, let's say a mechanism to address loss and damage, so the risks and the losses that are already occurring. The technology transfer is also an important part. The voluntary cooperation, so we will see what was formerly called the market mechanism, a verification system, the global stocktake. We'll go through that as well, and especially I think it's a very important pillar also the transparency, which is actually as we said, as all the targets are actually based on nationally determined contribution, their achievement are assessed by each country, the achievement of the target, and this can be done through the transparency mechanism, a common transparency mechanism that actually check them whether these ambitious targets are achieved or not. I don't know why it sometimes works. So what are the different targets that have been, since there were not any guidelines, specific guidelines, very broad and general, but even the scope of the NDC could be even beyond, should be preferably mitigation and reduction of emissions, but some countries only expressed the target into the adaptation targets rather than mitigation targets. And also the way they expressed the emission reduction target are completely different. There are absolute targets such as reduction against 1 year, like EU has a target, presented a target of 40% reduction, the reduction against 1990 emissions. So the 32 countries NDCs that have been based on absolute target. Others have intensity targets, like in GDP intensity, CO2 or emissions per GDP unit, or picking targets, like I will peak my emissions in my curve, I will increase, but up to 2030, and then I will decline my emissions. Others make a list of policies and measures, mitigation, like without any quantification. So saying I will implement this list of policies. Others, mainly most of the developing countries, they actually presented the target as a deviation of their business as usual emissions. Like, okay, I have my right of development, I will increase my emissions, but I will this increase of emissions will be lower than expected, than in my business as usual. So this is 78 actually NDCs that express their target as a decrease of their business as usual scenario. So we have a very different and diverse types of targets, and it's a bit tricky then to compare the effort between one country to the other. But actually, was actually the basis of the Paris Agreement, so to have a freedom from countries to express and to provide their ambitious targets in a way that it was achievable, respecting their national circumstances. 1 second, I have to. Okay, I've lost. No, sorry. What time is it, Danilo? Is it?
You are 5 minutes to the break. So if you want to stop now, it would be perfect.
Let me check what's next. Just not to. Just to conclude this part, and then we will go into the transparency. So we'll have these different NDCs as I was introducing you, and each NDC has to track the achievement of the target, which is, as we call in the negotiation, in this UNFCCC, accounting. The accounting is actually the check of towards of what you achieved towards your target. So in the EU, for example, we have reduced 26% of emissions from 1990. So the accounting is how far we are from our target of 40% in 2030. So, but as we have a different way to express the target, the accounting varies from NDC to NDC. This is a little bit tricky. So even the rules for accounting could not be so tight and so specific, because also the metric of the NDC could be different. Not all NDCs are expressed in greenhouse gas reduction metrics. They could be policies and measures, so they are not. So it's a yes and no. It's qualitative. Have you implemented those policies? Yes, no. So it was completely a radical change from the previous Kyoto Protocol, let's say, world, where we had a clear target expressed in reduction of greenhouse gases. So also all the accounting methods were very strict based on specific rules. Now the rules are, let's say, more broader to actually accommodate all the different NDCs expressed in different ways. Then everything should go under a common registry, and it's extremely important that there is an avoidance of double counting. This is extremely important because all the robustness of the system is actually based on at the end of the day, what we need is to reduce the emissions in the atmosphere. This counts, and this cannot be. The system cannot allow for double counting of these achievements. Okay, and then we will go later in the transparency. So I will stop here for questions. I need to. Should I stop sharing? Right?
Or if you want, you can
yes,
leave it.
Yes, because if
maybe
the postman.
Yeah. Okay.
This from home.
Okay, so if there are questions, okay, there is one question from Lupa. If the G20 are responsible of 85% of the GAG and GDP, the LDCs are responsible for what? Yet the impact of emission is felt more by developing countries. I would like to know if the road towards economic and industrialization in LDCs will survive the GAG emissions. Yet green revolution is expensive too. Thank you, Lupa. Oh, and Lupa is. So.
Yeah, indeed, these developing countries need to, are responsible of, I wouldn't say responsible, because the level of emission those countries are so small that what they would need is helping in adaptation and technology transfer. And we know, there are several studies also at the EU level that these transitions towards low carbon emissions is possible. And it's economically actually convenient in some cases. It needs to actually to shift completely the world economic equilibrium that was based on fossil fuel. This is the great challenge, but technically it's feasible, it's possible, and indeed the major effort needs to come from the G20 countries, and there I'm telling you now. We are going out from a presidency, Saudi Arabian presidency of the G20, and I had discussions on climate change. There was a big focus on nature-based solutions, but there are problems in actually focusing on climate change and robust action. So, I think that there is the most, the G20 should actually take on board the major effort, because they have the tools, the economic strength do it. LDCs need to be helped towards that and to have this low carbon development ensured in several aspects: technology transfer, capacity building, finance. All these needs to be reinforced, indeed. I don't know if I answer your questions, but
please, I have my hand raised up.
Sorry?
I have my hands raised up. I have a question. Thank you for the presentation, please. Mine is, what are the mechanisms in place to measure or monitor the extent of implementation of the NDC as submitted by countries? Thank you.
I will go into this question later. I mean, now we have this this general overview, but now I will treat a little bit more in details the different tools, and including this one. But so be patient. I will, and then if I've not clarified that, please come back. Yes, indeed, LDC needs more adaptation and resilience. Their impact on greenhouse gas emissions, but we have to see also this into perspective. I mean, at the moment, I would say yes, you're right. That LDC needs more adaptation and resilience, but needs also to be developed. I mean, needs also to be to have a right to develop. And this right doesn't come at cost of the environment. So a right to sustainable and low carbon development, I would say. So not only adaptation and resilience, I mean, mainly, but also technology for a low carbon development.
Okay, are there any questions? Okay, maybe you have to warm up a little bit. Okay, if Lucia agrees, we can make a 5-minute stop, and just so I can stop the recording. You can change if you need your PowerPoint, and then we can go on. Okay, see you in 5 minutes.